So we talked about the gold ABCD assessment tool, and where you have this ABCD for grading of the severity of the symptoms. Any case of any patient of COPD, you have to classify them into any one of these following A, B, C, D, and I would like to reiterate what does this stand for. So we talked about MMRC. MMRC is the Modified Medical Research Council Dyspnea scale, where you have the grading system, just like the New York dyspnea scale, where which we do in cases of dyspnea, but with slight differences. The grade, as MMRC grade says, grade 0 is when somebody gets breathless with strenuous exercise. Grade 1 is short of breath on either hurrying on the level or walking up a slight hill. And grade 2 is the patient says that he does his activity, he walks slower than his peer, and he finds a slight bit of breathlessness on walking his normal pace on a ground level. And the grade 3 is when he has to stop while walking and he has to catch his breath. And grade 4 is he's too breathless to walk around, even to uh, it's something like breathless on even a minimal exertion, like even dressing up or dressing down. So this is very important. The other thing is this ABCD classification. It encompasses MMRC plus the patient's history of exacerbation or his history of hospitalization. These two things they go along with this classification. Oh, तो हो रहा है. हाँ. Are you able to see the slides? सर के चश्मे में देखनी है क्या? नहीं, they are not able to see. Slides नहीं देख रहे.
दिख रहा ना?
नहीं देख रहे. Slides नहीं देख रहे. I think the slides is not visible to you. We are working on this. Type कर रहा हूँ. It's very slow actually. ये प्रॉब्लम सिर्फ इसी क्लास में होती है, बाकी क्लासेस में भी होती है.
आपकी क्लास में कुछ ज़्यादा ही स्ट्रेंथ रहता है ना.
Are you able to see the slides? No. Somebody saying no, somebody saying yes. Yes, they able to see it. Yes तो लिख. No, no sir लिख रहे. Not in presentation, but they are visible. We can only see you. So मुझे slides नहीं दिख रहे हैं लोगों. फ्री का रहेगा तो ऐसे ही आता है. म्यूट कर दो वॉल्यूम. मैसेज करके पूछते हैं. चलो चलो लगाओ लगाओ करने दो रहने दो कोई बात नहीं वेरी स्लो है ये बहुत स्लो है
तो दिख रहा है कि नहीं?
slides are you able to see these slides दिख रहा है now you able to see these slides somebody saying no somebody saying yes कैसे पता करें नो सर
Minimize कीजिए तो इसको
ये एक बार में तो होता कर दिया मैंने बस while he's working on the slides uh, last class was about COPD as you all know and we've talked about the management part and for assessing the symptoms of the patients and initiation of the treatment and the follow-up we had categorized we have used two tools one of one of it is ABCD which is being promoted by the International Society the ABCD assessment tool and the other one is gold grading criteria. So the gold grading criteria was based on spirometry. It was divided amongst the four types. Gold one was when you have the FEV1 more than 80%. Gold 2 was the FEV1 was 50 to 79. Gold 3 is the when your for expiratory volume is 30 to 49 and goal 4 is a very severe case of COPD where you have FEV1 less than 30 and in all these cases the proposed bronchodilation ratio of FEV1 and FVC is less than 0.7 so this is the other criteria ABCD it has superseded this criteria because it has an additional advantage of assessing patient's present symptom and patient's predisposition to exacerbation further acute exacerbation because one of the goal of our treatment is to stall any further exacerbation to keep the patient as much symptomless as possible because as you all know COPD is non-reversible and it's progressive and you need to give patient a hassle-free life so that was the criteria of ABCD was set in. Are you able to see these slides? This I have opened up this assessment tool slides where you can are you able to see it?
ये दिख रहा है
पता नहीं
पीछे का
ओपन भी तो इतना स्लो है अब somebody is typing here, somebody. You can see now. Somebody said no, sir. So you're able to see the slides now. I'm not getting any. I'm not getting an very clear idea. Some of you are typing, they're not able to see, and some of you are typing, they're able to see. So I assume you are able to see it, and don't worry, I'll try to make it more explanatory, even if you're not able to see the slides. We'll talk about it when the classes starts. Shall we carry on? You able to see the slides? I just flashed you the slides. Are you able to see it? Okay, I'll keep checking on whether you're able to see it or not. Somebody saying no, somebody saying yes. Full and clear. So this was the criteria, ABCD criteria, where you have to apply the Modified Medical Research Council Dyspnea scale. This is something analogous to New York Dyspnea classification, where you have breathlessness on minimal exertion, and similarly you have this Modified Medical Research Dyspnea scale, where the patient, the grade 0 is when you get breathless only on strenuous exercise. Grade 1 is the patient tends to get breathless when he's hurrying up on the level, or is walking up the hill, or up a couple of stairs. And grade 2 is when the patient says that he walks slower than his peer, and he has to stop while he's walking on his own pace. And grade 3 is he stops for a while after walking for some time, try to catch up his breath, and then walks again. So with somewhat exertion, he is breathless. And grade 4 is even at a minimal or slightest exertion, like dressing up, undressing, walking around your bed, or walking around in his house, he feels very breathless, and so he tries to minimize his activities. So that is grade 4. So how the classification is put over here, you have A, B, C, D. So it depends on the MMRC scale, which should be 0 to 1 comes under category A and C, and MMRC greater than 2 is category under B and D. So when MMRC is 0 to 1, that means patient is low risk patient. Symptomatically he is comfortable, but when MMRC is greater than 2, he is not comfortable. And then you have this criteria. The A stands for whether patient has number of exacerbation 1 or less than 1 with no history of hospitalization. And the grade C is when the patient is symptomatically less, but he has history of exacerbation 2 or more than 2, and one of the exacerbation leading to hospitalization. So the grade A is without hospitalization, 1 exacerbation, MMRC 0 to 1, and grade C is MMRC 0 to 1, and hospitalization once or exacerbation more than twice. And B and D is for more symptomatic patients, where you have MRC greater than 2, and history of hospitalization might be not present on grade B, and it might be present on grade D. So this is the basic ABCD classification. And as I told you, when the patient falls under grade A, he does comfortable with symptomatic bronchodilator, using as and when required bronchodilators like short-acting beta agonist or short-acting muscarinic antagonist. And then on the grade B, we have to initiate a long-acting bronchodilator that can be in the form of LAMA or LABA. So long-acting muscarinic antagonist or long-acting beta agonist. But LAMA is statistically and as the different clinical trials have showed that LAMA is better than LABA when used as a solo therapy and on a regular basis for grade B patients. Grade C patients, you can use LABA and LAMA solo therapy, or you can add LAMA plus LABA, or even you can use LABA plus ICS, that is inhalation corticosteroid. But the role of corticosteroid is very limited in cases of COPD because it's more of a obstructive pathology rather than the inflammatory one, which was in cases of asthma. But if the patient does not improve with this treatment, when you have LABA plus LAMA or LABA plus ICS, you can add on ICS to LABA plus LAMA and LAMA to ICS plus LABA. That is for patients with grade C. Grade A is very severe criteria where you can use LAMA plus LABA plus ICS, all the triple drugs, and can use the additional drugs like I talked about, phosphodiesterase inhibitors, roflumilast, or you can even try phosphodiesterase inhibitors like aminophylline and theophylline. So these are the additional drugs which you can use. This was the algorithm for the stable COPD patients. Once you categorize them based on the ABCD assessment scheme and exacerbation risk, so you try to maintain the patient symptom free. They should stay symptom free after the initial treatment has been started. This is the picture which shows what is the basic treatment you can try on these patients. As you see, group A, you can give symptomatically bronchodilator, which should be short-acting beta agonist or short-acting muscarinic antagonist. And on patients under group B, you can give long-acting bronchodilators, LABA and LABA or LAMA. And group C patients, you can try LAMA plus LABA combination, or LAMA as a monotherapy. You can start on a monotherapy. And for group D, basically you have to try all the possible combinations. For follow-up for pharmacological treatment, as I said, depends on the patient's symptoms, whether if there is a persistent breathlessness or exercise limitations. Those who are on monotherapy, they can have dual therapy. Any LABA or LAMA can be added if he is on LAMA or LABA, and we can try several. You can try even ICS when the patient is persistently breathless in spite of using LAMA plus LABA therapy. So this is basically a follow-up therapy, and certain patients they don't improve, then you can always look for encompassing symptom mark, maybe at the overlap of asthma. Certain COPD, they might have patient might have an overlapping asthmatic symptoms. So if the finding suggests of asthma, you can add ICS in such patients. And if blood eosinophil counts is high, you can always try corticosteroid. What is acute exacerbation, COPD exacerbation? Are you able to hear it? Are you able to hear my voice? Are we talking about the acute exacerbation? So what is acute exacerbation? So acute exacerbation of COPD exacerbation is basically any increase in symptoms beyond a normal day-to-day variations. And how will you assess the symptom? The patient will say he had increase in frequency of cough, and the severity of cough has increased. There might be a sputum production increase in volume and character. Even the dyspnea level has increased. So these are the signs of severity when you clinically examine the patient. He might be using accessory respiratory muscles like sternocleidomastoid and all the accessory muscles, lower intercostal. There will be paradoxical chest wall movements because of the accessory muscle, intercostal muscle working. Then there can be worsening or new onset central cyanosis. Then there might be a tendency of development of peripheral edema, or patient might go for dip in blood pressure, and so there might be hemodynamic instability. The patient might be altered, and there might be an altered mental status because of the ensuing hypoxia. So the global initiative for COPD, which is the GOLD, it says the exacerbation of COPD is increase in symptoms which is beyond a normal day-to-day variations, and it includes all the cardinal features we had talked about, and risk potential. If such patients comes to your OPD or your clinic, you have to assess a proper history taking and certain points. Like one of those is like if there is a marked increase in intensity of symptoms, that might force you to admit the patient in the hospital. Or maybe there is severe underlying COPD where you have FEV1 maybe less than 30% or less than 40%, and there might be onset of physical signs like cyanosis or peripheral edema, or the exacerbation does not respond to those symptomatic drugs, those short-acting bronchodilators. If the patient stays breathless, his oxygen saturation keeps dipping, then you might think of admitting the patient in the ICU. There might be a serious comorbidities. There are chances of viral infections, bacterial infection, pneumonia, heart failure, and if the patient is suffering from frequent exacerbation in last month or two, or patient old age. So these are the certain criteria for hospitalization. So if a patient there is in the outpatient management does not relieve the patient of the symptoms, the tendency, there is a marked increase in dyspnea, the patient is not able to eat or speak properly, is not able to sleep due to symptoms, there is worsening hypoxemia or worsening hypercapnia that can be assessed through ABG. When you take a ABG sample of the patient, you can look for the pH and PCO2 and arterial pressure, partial pressure of the oxygen. If the arterial partial pressure of the carbon dioxide is more than 40, and or if the arterial partial pressure of oxygen is less than 55, you might tend to admit such patients in the hospital in the ICU setup. Because usually what happens in COPD, when the patient is breathless, he's tried to hyperventilate, and he's tried to ejaculate carbon dioxide, but so the any worsening hypercapnia, any retention of carbon dioxide, that portends warning sign or red flag signs. Then any changes in mental status, then there is another criteria is when the patient is not able to care for himself because of the lack of home support, because these exacerbation can lead to sudden death, sudden respiratory failure, and in no time. So if the patient lives by himself and he comes to the OPD, then you might tend to admit such patient in the hospital. And there are certain comorbidities, like I said, pneumonia, cardiac arrhythmias, diabetes, renal failure. If the patient with any of such histories, such patient, they have to be admitted. There is no other point. So what you do when the patient is admitted in your hospital? First and the foremost thing, the treatment of choice is inhaled beta agonist, short-acting inhaled beta agonist. But the first treatment of choice is oxygen. Basically, you have to give a low flow oxygen through the nasal mask or the face mask. Once you assess the SpO2 saturation through pulse oximetry, or you try to assess ABG and you make out the partial pressure of arterial partial pressure of oxygen and arterial partial pressure of the carbon dioxide. And if it's less, you should start on the oxygen as soon as possible. And the oxygen should be a low flow oxygen, because you don't want to take away the hypoxemic drive, which is a body's his own ability to counteract the exacerbation. If the oxygen saturation is less than 90, or if arterial partial pressure of oxygen is less than 55, you'll start on a low flow oxygen. Why you will start on a low flow oxygen? As said, because you don't want to take away the respiratory drive. That is, when the patient is hypoxemic, the carotid receptors and these all are stimulated, and the body has a tendency to compensate and hyperventilate. So you don't want to take away that drive from the patient. The second treatment is definitely bronchodilator. Most beta agonists, you can use both muscarinic antagonist or short-acting beta agonist, and they have to be used as a nebulized therapy. The treatment of choice is nebulized therapy rather inhalation therapy. There is no role for intravenous or subcutaneous injectable bronchodilators, because they have the effect is equitable and these adverse effects are enormous. So you have to rely on the nebulization therapy, on inhalation therapy, and you can give the usual protocol is to give every 20 minutes, give beta agonist for three times for the first hour, and then continue beta agonist on an hourly basis. And since the exacerbation mostly in the COPD is one of the most common causes, the pneumonia and the viral and bacterial infection. So if the patient is not responding, you can start on antibiotics. And the other thing is, such patient you should administer glucocorticoid to reduce the length of stay, hasten recovery, and reduce the chances of subsequent exacerbation and relapse for a period of up to 6 months. The guideline says that you can start on corticosteroid, which the recommended dose is 30 to 40 milligram of oral prednisolone, and that should be given for a period of 10 to 14 days only. It should not continue for a long time, until even if there is, you can give a steroid for a span of 5 days also. So, and the other thing is, you can, if the patient is not conducive to take orally, you can give them intravenous glucocorticoid. As I said, oxygen you can give through simple mask, or you can give through Venturi mask. And in order to keep the oxygen saturation around 9 to 92%, you never try to keep a goal of higher SpO2 level somewhere around 95 or more, because as I said, it will take away the respiratory drive of the patient. Then if the patient, after giving all these treatment, if the patient does not respond, you can always try for, there is two kind of ventilatory support, non-invasive and invasive. So for that you have to assess the patient's condition in the triage. If the patient is suffering from respiratory acidosis, or there is severe dyspnea and there is obtundation of mental status of the patient, and there is a clear-cut cyanosis, then you can always try to use a non-invasive mechanical ventilation. And even if that doesn't work, you can always look for an invasive mechanical ventilation. And these are certain points which indicates the scenario where you can use invasive mechanical ventilation. patient not tolerating non-invasive ventilation, or patient undergoing impending respiratory failure, because once the patient goes into respiratory failure, it doesn't give you more time to resuscitate the patient. So you have to uh, assess, and on the in a very short span of time, you have to see if the patient is responding to the initial treatment or not. And if the patient is going for impending respiratory failure, you have to take the patient on invasive mechanical ventilation. Or if there is a certain loss of consciousness, or gasping for air, or diminished consciousness, there is a massive aspiration because of obtundation in mental status, or if the patient is unable to remove respiratory secretion, and the patient if the patient goes into bradycardia, or there is a severe hypotension, hemodynamic instability, or if there is a ventricular arrhythmias. So these all are the indication for invasive mechanical ventilation. So this is all about COPD. Acute exacerbation I talked about. It has to be managed as per the status of the patient, and once the patient is comes to you in exacerbation, uh, you have to quickly make a decision. You have to make an action plan and quickly make a decision, because patient might go in for respiratory failure and cardiac arrest. Then the patient won't give you much time to resuscitate the patient once he or she goes into respiratory failure. So you have to be right on the tip of your. You have to be very alert when the patient comes to you in the OPD or in the triage, and this is how this acute exacerbation is taken care of. Once the patient is comfortable, or patient is doing well on treatment, on whatever treatment you have induced, and once the patient is ready for discharge, you can switch back the patient to the initial treatment which was going on, along with the short acting bronchodilators as a needed basis. So it depends on the individual variations. This is all about COPD exacerbation. Now we will talk about we're gonna talk about the acute exacerbation of bronchial asthma. As we know, the bronchial asthma, the only difference, tactically, the only difference is reversibility of airflow obstruction in bronchial asthma. So even in asthma, any acute episode is basically due to airflow obstruction and airway responsiveness. And the definition is asthma exacerbation is again symptom. If the patient is symptomatic with increased breathlessness, episode of increased breathlessness, cough, wheeze, chest tightness, or combination of these symptoms. So this is more or less same as it happens in COPD. There is a certain enhancement of these symptoms. Patient is symptomatic, and which is quite different from the normal variation of symptom which happens in the normal asthmatic or COPD patients. And the exacerbation may be progressive or abrupt onset. It might be seasonal. It might happen in the rainy season or in the winter season, and it is always related to decrease in expiratory airflows, and which can be quantified by objective measurements, that is through spirometry, where you can assess PEF1 or FE1, force expiratory volume 1, or peak expiratory flow rate. And for triggers, what are the triggers for exacerbation in asthma? As I said, the seasonal variation, viral infection of the upper respiratory tract, or even the bacterial infection, or if the patient exposed to any allergens, environmental irritants, even it's been hypothesized even the emotional trigger can be one of the predisposing factor for exacerbation. And any medications like beta blockers or even aspirins, as in cases of we talked about this atopic patients with asthma, the aspirin can also leads to exacerbation or poor asthma control. These are all the trigger factors, and there are certain risk factors for potentially fatal asthma, like any history of fatal asthma before, any previous admission to the ICU, or there is admission for asthma in the last year, or there may be excessive use of beta 2 agonist. The patient is using in such an enormous amount that they might be using one or more than one canister in a month, and they might be using prolonged oral corticosteroid. That is another one of the reason for one of the very predisposing factor for exacerbation, rather potentially fatal asthma. So how would you assess the patient? The patient comes to you with myriads of symptoms. You have to look for any respiratory rate, pulse rate, look for any tachycardia or tachypnea, where this patient is able to speak properly, where he is able to complete his sentences, where he's conscious and oriented, the use of accessory muscles of respiration, the amount of V's which is present, uh, and then a peak expiratory flow rate. Very easy to assess peak expiratory flow rate. You have flow meters which is available or very easily around the corner, where you can order on or even online, and you can assess the expiratory flow rate. If it's less than 200 ml per hour, that indicates the severity or exacerbation of asthma. So this is basically the asthma exacerbation. It is being categorized into mild, moderate, and severe, and the one portending to respiratory arrest. So mild, moderate, and severe. So clinically you will assess the patient is breathless. If he's not walking around, is not able to speak in a sentence. So then, or if he can lie down, but he speaks in sentences, and is able to walk around, but is not able to. He gets breathless while walking up a flight of stairs. He might be slight agitated, and the respiratory rate might be increased. Usually the axillary muscles are not being used, and V's might be end expiratory V's might be present. So it falls under the mild asthma exacerbation. Then the moderate asthma exacerbation is patient is breathless on minimal exertion, and he prefers sitting in a tripod, sitting with arm stretch and body leaning forward in order to expirate properly, in order to use his axillary muscles. He might speak in phrases. He might not even speak a full sentence. There might be sweating, the respiratory rate is high, and use of accessory muscles is present, and V's will be loud and clearly heard. Then severe cases, when your patient is breathless even at rest, and is hunching forward, he speaks only in words, and he has to catch his breath while speaking, and the patient is agitated, and the respiratory rate is high, and frequent use of accessory muscles, and the V's might be very loud, and there are chances that the chest will be silent because of the enormous obstruction. The chest might be even silent, but silent chest is always a very alarming or red flag sign in cases of asthma exacerbation. And who are the patient who will go for impending respiratory arrest? Those who is not able to, who is altered in consciousness, who is drowsy, and there is a paradoxical thoracoabdominal movements, and as I said, V's is absent, is a completely silent chest. So that portends a very warning sign, a very bad omen, when the patient comes to you with silent chest. Now this is how you classify based on the PEF or FEV1 calculation. Mild, you will find the PEF is more than 7. Are you able to see these slides? Are you able to see this slide? First let me know, are you able to see these slides? This computer is very slow. Are you? Okay, so full screen. I'll make it a full screen. Okay. So while calculating PEF or FEV1, you will see the apart from the clinical features, the mild degree of severity is mild when PEF1 is, and that the PEF1 is still more than 70%. PEF is more than 70%, or FEV1 is 40 to 69%. It falls under moderate, and severe is when FEV1 is less than 40%. And life-threatening impending respiratory failure is when PEF is less than 25%. So approximately what you do in case a mild cases comes to you, that patients can be treated at home. The only thing you need to advise the patient, first and the foremost thing, there is something called asthma action plan. Whenever a patient comes to you, you have to counsel him about the asthma action plan. You have to tell him how to take the inhalers, how to adhere to the inhalers, the technique of inhalation, how to assess your symptoms, and how often you can use these reliever medicines, that short-acting beta agonist or short-acting muscarinic antagonist. So mild cases comes to you, there will be prompt relief with inhaled short-acting beta agonist, and you can consider a short course of oral systemic corticosteroid, but not necessary. But if the exacerbation is moderate and the patient lands up in the emergency department, again you tend to admit such patients, and he'll start on an inhaled short-acting beta agonist, and you have to immediately start oral steroid. And if the patient improves in a day or two, you can always think of discharging. In severe cases, absolute hospitalization. Again, that relief is through oxygen. Patient should be put on an oxygen, a continuous oxygen flow, and along with that you can give inhaled short-acting beta agonist, oral or systemic corticosteroids, and you can try all the other adjunctive therapies. What is important, the inhalation should not be stopped when the patient is on oxygen, and the line of oxygenation should be different from the line of inhalation. The line you're using for oxygen therapy for the patient should be different from the line you're using for inhalational therapy for the patient. And when the patient coming to you in emergency, and if he's going in for impending respiratory failure, apart from intravenous corticosteroid, short-acting beta agonist, you have to assess the patient from the point of view of mechanical ventilation. As soon as the patient could be put on mechanical ventilation, better for him. So the first line in initial management of acute asthma is again oxygen, and anything comes after oxygen is short-acting beta agonist, bronchodilators, steroid therapy, or antimuscarinic therapy can be tried as well. Additional therapy is magnesium sulfate. These is cases of status asthmaticus or asthmaticus or severe asthma. You can use these additional therapy. You can give intravenous magnesium sulfate. What does magnesium sulfate do? It recruits calcium and it causes bronchodilation. So the dose is 2 gram, and it is just given as an additional, as an one only dose. It is not to be repeated. So 2 gram magnesium sulfate can be given as a bolus dose when the patient comes with severe asthma. You can even try if the patient is on ventilated, or he is not able to he is not fit to take inhalational beta agonist. So you can try in intravenous or subcutaneous beta agonist infusion. You can even try intravenous aminophylline, but it has to be a low dose aminophylline. The aminophylline treatment is now of a very of it was used very in commonly in the past, but now it's of more or like a historical importance. It can be used in a very low dose, and it is used as a supplementary, not as a primary treatment. So you can try magnesium sulfate. And even there is one, if the patient with acute asthma, if the potential trigger is allergen, so you are considering any allergen or drug induced or environmental triggers, there is something called subcutaneous epinephrine injection, which can be tried at the dose of 0.3 to 0.5 milligram, 1 into 1000 dilution. That can be given subcutaneous or intramuscularly. So once the patient has been given the initial drugs, you have to reassess the patient after 1 hour, and you have to look for the PF. If there is improvement in PF, you can wean down your treatment. But if the PF stays less than 60% and patient still has higher symptoms, severe symptoms, you can escalate your therapy. So again, the patient is reassessed after 1 to 2 hours, and the patient is responding well. If the SpO2 shoots up to more than 90%, PFR shoots up to more than 70%, then you can always plan a discharge the very next day. But if the patient with incomplete response from a moderate to mild, if patient switches from moderate symptom to mild and PFR is still less, you can still have to keep admitting the patient. And the patient was not responded in spite of giving low dose aminophylline, in spite of giving magnesium sulfate, and is still deteriorating, you can always have to admit the patient in the ICU and try for ventilation therapy. So this is basically a flow chart showing a ward therapy, and this is basically a flow chart ward plus ICU therapy. In ward care, you can give oxygen or beta 2 agonist on an as needed basis, and you can even try systemic steroids and to monitor SpO2, potassium level, PFR. Patient is improved, he can plan discharge. And in ICU, again, you have to give systemic steroid. You might try terbutaline IV beta infusion. You can consider aminophylline infusion too. If the patient is still not responding, you should immediately intubate the patient and put on a mechanical ventilation. The criteria for discharge is again when the patient is doing well, his PFR is improving, he is doing well on oral or inhaled medication, so he can put on a oral and inhaled medication, and the patient can be subsequently discharged. And as you can see, the criteria for ventilation, the patient is hypoxic, there is a depressed level of consciousness, there is impending respiratory failure, hemodynamic compromise, you have bradycardia, then you have acute respiratory acidosis, or peak flow PF is less than 40 or 25%. You can immediately go in with ventilation. And these are guidelines for mechanical ventilation. This is beyond the scope of your knowledge, I think. Where you start with a low tidal volume because the patient have tendency to go for barotrauma or pneumothorax, and patient has to be there should be limited use of sedation and paralytics. So this is all about acute asthma exacerbation and COPD exacerbation. where in acute asthma you have to assess the severity of exacerbation. You have to grade the severity: mild, moderate, and severe, and then accordingly you have to initiate your therapy, and you have to assess the patient who to be hospitalized, and patient who have to be put in ward, and patient who have to be put in ICU, and the patient who have to be ventilated. So this is all about acute exacerbation of bronchial asthma. So any query, you can post your queries on the message window. You can post your query. Even if you don't understand a lot of concepts, we'll again discuss all this in the class, and you just go through the ABCD classification, and as we see more patients in the OPDs and in the hospitals, you will easily able to classify such patients of COPD exacerbation, or asthma action plan, how to initiate an asthma action plan. Step down, as I said, when the patient is symptomatically is doing well, like we assess for his spirometrically, we assess for the clinical symptoms, how is he doing symptom wise. Then you assess for the ABG, you do repeated acid base gas analysis. Then you look for the PEF, you look for the FEV1 value. If it has improving, it is improving, and if the clinical signs are also improving, if SpO2 is also improving, patient is doing well, he's comfortable, his heart rates, his respiratory rates is settling down, so you can think of weaning off the drugs. No, tachycardia should not be normally present in cases of asthma. It should not be present. No. Either the sometimes the dose of beta 2 inhaler will be a little higher, so the patient might be having tachycardia. But tachycardia as per se should not be present in asthmatic patient who's doing comfortable on drugs. Then you have to address that problem if there is still tachycardia in patient who is asthmatic. So in absence of asthmatic attack, the patient is tachycardic, that means he has not been properly controlled on drugs. I know there might be a lot of questions, and as you go through your clinicals, you get to know a lot many cases. We can always rediscuss all what we have talked about. No, prolonged use of beta agonists, short-acting beta agonists, it not necessarily causes resistance to the patient, because it has a very short duration of action, and the only thing is when you're using short-acting beta agonist for a long period of time, especially in asthmatic patient, you have to top up with corticosteroid, inhalational corticosteroid, because the persistent, you are addressing the airflow obstruction, but you have forgotten the persistent inflammation which is going on. So patients who are on beta agonist for a long period of time without supplementing with corticosteroid can be dangerous for the patient. Beta agonists can cause certain adverse effect, but it won't really cause resistance. So read out the topic of COPD and asthma, whatever book you have, Davidson or whatever book you are following. And queries, we can always address your queries in between the classes or during your clinical postings. Any further query?